Whether this is your first video shoot or you're a seasoned professional, I want to talk about some of the realities that a lot of video productions face, especially on the lower budget side of things, and give you some tips on how to fix those. That way, when you're jumping into that film set, whether it's tomorrow or next week, you're that much more prepared for what you're gonna kind of encounter when you get on set. I want to approach this from the eyes of both the video crew and the client, because at the end of the day, they both need to be on the same page as to what needs to happen, what needs to get done. This is already under the assumption that you have a pretty clear game plan of what you need to capture, and there is no unknowns in terms of what you need to achieve throughout the day, but you also have a realistic schedule in place that you want to follow. The key part here is having a realistic schedule, because there are many times when clients think that they can squeeze a lot more into the shoot day, but the reality of productions is that you need to go through every step of the productions. And if anything, what I would recommend is giving yourself a good cushion of time, so that way you're not at the end of the day and you're still missing out on a lot of material that needs to be covered. That's pretty much the worst case scenario, so you always want to give yourself a good cushion. It's also great for client and crew expectations, so that when that time hits, people aren't thinking that there's still a lot more to shoot. And it just keeps everybody on the same page. So scheduling, number one, before we even get into this, is super, super important. Now, the first thing, and one of the more overlooked aspects of a smaller production, would be location scouting. This is typically overlooked when there just isn't budget for it, or the time frame just doesn't allow for it, or maybe even where you're shooting doesn't allow you to go in and see what the space will look like beforehand. I would say, if at all possible, try to do a location scout to get an idea of what you're getting into. It'll save a lot of time on the day and a lot of questions, and you'll just have the right gear in place for when those unexpected things happen throughout the day. The next thing I want to talk about is how and where you're going to get the equipment to the location. This seems like a pretty elementary thing, and it is something that you would cover if you were doing a location scout, but there have been many times when I've gotten to a shoot where we haven't been able to location scout, and you start really figuring out like how to get things in the door to the location. If you're working at a larger size building in a bigger city, in a big school campus, whatever the case is, you're always going to run into obstacles getting the equipment to where it needs to be. Oftentimes I'll ask about elevators or where the closest parking space is to where we're going, and a lot of times they don't really know, but it's better to just be proactive about it and try to get the best results as possible when you get there, so you're not wasting any time figuring that whole situation out when you arrive there. I've had a few instances where we were proactive about getting this information from client, but even when we arrived on set, it turned out to be a whole fiasco and ended up wasting maybe an hour or two just getting things in the door because of the logistics and layout of the location. So that's almost an hour or two that we lost to set up, and ultimately kind of pushed the whole production back a little bit. So that was a huge learning experience, but ultimately, no matter how proactive I was with the production, it still didn't really matter, and we had to adapt when we were there on set. Now, this is one of my favorite tips because it can really apply to almost any production that you're doing, but it's really taking, whether it's 5 or 10 minutes, once you get everything on location with your crew and equipment and everything like that, and really just firm up your game plan for the day. Know where the cameras are going, know where the lights are going, know what you need to accomplish throughout the day. Know that after this setup, you're going to move the cameras and lights for another setup, or maybe after this setup, you're going to use a gimbal or a dolly or a Steadicam, because it's usually super hectic getting everything and everybody on location for the shoot. So just once you have all that, just really pause, kind of calm everything down, and I found that just having that moment to really regroup with everybody has been super crucial for making everything run smoothly. Now, the next tip is pretty universal for almost any production, but it's knowing when to stop the production if something's going wrong and when to keep going. So the best example of this that I run into a lot, especially with interview shoots, is audio sake. So say you have a subject talking on camera and I don't know, a loud noise happens, or maybe it's just a noisy environment, you have to be very upfront and on your feet with not only the client but also the subject to let them know what the issue is and figure out what the solution is. So if it's just a temporary noise, maybe that's just restarting a little bit of their talking portion. Or if it's more of an ongoing issue, you need to pretty much be quick on your feet and adapt and figure out the best game plan to reduce whatever that issue is. If it's a sound, if it's something, maybe you need to go talk to somebody, maybe you need to move your whole setup somewhere else where the noise won't be an issue. Because the last thing that you want is to get back from a full shoot day and realize that you had a noise in the background that's going to ruin the audio, or you had something going on in the background, or whatever the case is. And that problem ultimately falls on you because you are the production. So you really want to be aware of these things that might be going on that could be hurting your production. At the end of the day, you can only control so much, but just being aware of it and letting the client know is a huge first step. Keep the awareness open, tell a crew member, tell the client, tell somebody if there is an issue, so that way they're aware of it, and you just have more people accountable and trying to remediate the problem as soon as you can. Lastly, one of the most harsh realities of any video production is gonna be dealing with the weather and the sunlight and all of these things that us humans just simply can't control. No matter how many lights you have, no matter how many lighting modifiers you have, you can't change where the sun is, you can't change if it's gonna get cloudy, and you can't change if it's about to rain or snow. So the first step is really just awareness of knowing what the weather forecast is going to look like throughout the day or multiple days that you're shooting. You can also use something like a sun surveyor app to see where the sun is going to be at a certain point of the day. I would recommend, of course, if you can, doing this during the location scout as well. So that way you can literally stand in the location, see where the sun is going to be. And that way at least it isn't a surprise when you're at the shoot and say 4 o'clock or 7 o'clock comes around and the sun's going down. You know where the sun will be and you can kind of plan and anticipate any lighting setups that need to change when that time does come around. I want to wrap up this video by just saying that there's really 2 core things that you need to be really good at to really prevent or just remediate any of these issues on a film set. And that's just having open communication and being a good problem solver. Open communication is always going to help no matter what you're doing. Just in life in general, having good communication skills with whoever you're working with is super important. And then on top of that, knowing how to adapt when things do go wrong, and that's really where the problem solving comes into play. Having the right gear is also important, and it goes hand in hand with that. If you need a certain piece of equipment to solve the problem, you want to make sure that you have that equipment on hand and ready to go. You don't want it to be sitting at your house, however far away it may be. You want it to be right there with you when that problem occurs, so that way you can remediate it as fast as possible. It will bring you a long way when these types of problems come up, and you'll just look like that much more of a professional on set when you're dealing with some of these issues. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope this was informative, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next one.